Welcome back to Mystery Minds, the channel where we dive into the darkest corners of true crime, uncovering stories that shock, intrigue, and leave us questioning the world around us. In today's case, we bring you a chilling and twisted tale, one of betrayal, deception, and a deadly obsession. This is the story of a businessman who made a deal with the devil and ended up paying the ultimate price. A tale of greed, desperation, and calculated violence. This case will leave you wondering, what lengths will someone go to when their perfect life is on the line? And how could someone so close, someone you trust, become capable of such unspeakable acts? Stay with us as we unravel the dark and tragic story of Mexican Mafia debt. Businessman kills his wife over $3 million. Richard Alvarez had everything a man could want: wealth, power, and a beautiful wife by his side. From the outside, his life seemed like the picture of success. A thriving real estate business in Los Angeles, a sprawling mansion in Beverly Hills, and luxury cars that turned heads wherever he went. But what no one saw was the crumbling foundation beneath his empire. What started as a strategic business move had spiraled into a nightmare he couldn't escape. Years ago, Richard had made a risky decision. In an attempt to expand his portfolio, he borrowed money from an unconventional source, the Mexican Mafia. It was supposed to be a temporary solution, a stepping stone to bigger profits. The real estate market was booming, and he was confident that he could double or even triple the investment in no time. But when the market crashed, so did his plan. The $3 million he had borrowed was gone, swallowed by failed deals and unforeseen expenses. The problem was, the men he owed weren't the type to accept excuses. At first, the threats were subtle. Anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night. Cryptic messages slipped under his office door. But soon they escalated. A bullet left on the hood of his car. A dead animal on his doorstep. A photo of Elena with a red X drawn across her face. Richard tried to negotiate, but there was no bargaining with the people he was dealing with. They wanted their money, and they wanted it now. Desperation clawed at him. He had already drained his savings, taken out loans, and shuffled funds between accounts to buy himself time. But time was running out. The fear of what they might do to him, or worse, to Elena, kept him up at night. He started carrying a gun everywhere he went, flinching at every unexpected noise, watching his back every time he left the house. But even that wasn't enough. The pressure was suffocating, and he knew that if he didn't come up with the money soon, the consequences would be permanent. Then, a dark thought crept into his mind. He tried to push it away, but it refused to leave. There was a way out, a way to not only clear his debt but walk away with a profit. Elena's life insurance policy was worth $5 million. The payout would more than cover what he owed, and he would still have enough left to rebuild his life. The idea repulsed him at first. The thought of harming the woman he had built a life with was unthinkable. But as the days passed and the threats grew more menacing, the unthinkable started to feel like the only option. Richard knew he had to be smart. Any suspicion of foul play would lead to an investigation, and he couldn't afford to get caught. He spent nights researching, searching for ways to make it look like an accident. A home invasion gone wrong. A sudden illness. An unfortunate fall. Every scenario had its risks, and the last thing he needed was loose ends. Then, fate handed him the perfect opportunity. Their anniversary was coming up, and Elena had been hinting at a vacation. A trip would not only ease her suspicions but create the ideal setting for what he had in mind. Somewhere far from home, where accidents could happen without too many questions. He suggested Mexico, a place she loved, a place she would never suspect to be dangerous. She was thrilled, already planning the itinerary, excited for the getaway. As she packed, Richard watched her, his mind racing. He still had doubts, but every time he hesitated, he reminded himself of what was at stake. It was either her life or his. The decision had already been made. Elena had no idea that the trip she was looking forward to would be her last. Richard had never thought of himself as a killer. The idea of taking another person's life, especially Elena's, was something he once would have found impossible. But desperation had a way of twisting a man's mind, making the unthinkable feel like the only solution. He had exhausted every other option, The bank wouldn't give him another loan, his business partners had cut him off, and the Mexican Mafia's threats were growing more intense. The money had to come from somewhere, and the only remaining source was Elena's life insurance. The plan had to be flawless. If there was any sign of foul play, the insurance company would launch an investigation, and he would end up in prison instead of collecting the payout. He spent weeks researching methods, studying cases of accidental deaths that had resulted in insurance claims. The idea of staging a robbery at home seemed too risky. There would be too many questions, too many potential witnesses. A car accident felt unpredictable. Poisoning left too much room for error. Every possibility came with its own dangers, but then he found the answer. Drowning. It was quick, left little evidence, and if done correctly would appear to be a tragic accident. The upcoming trip to Mexico provided the perfect setting. The open ocean, a secluded area, no witnesses. He could make it seem like Elena had simply lost her balance, slipped, and disappeared into the depths. The thought of it sent a chill down his spine, but fear of what would happen if he failed pushed him forward. He had no choice. To avoid suspicion, Richard played the part of the loving husband perfectly. He suggested the trip himself, making it seem like a spontaneous anniversary gift. Elena was thrilled, completely unaware of the darkness lurking behind his gesture. She started planning their itinerary, choosing resorts, booking activities, and talking about all the memories they would make. He nodded along, pretending to be just as excited, but every detail of the trip was carefully chosen to fit his plan. A private boat ride was the key. No witnesses, no chance of survival. In the days leading up to their departure, Richard remained careful not to act out of character. Any sign of nervousness could tip her off, and the last thing he needed was for Elena to suspect anything was wrong. He maintained his usual routine, went to work as if nothing was different, and even spoke to friends about the trip, making sure it all seemed normal. But beneath the surface, his mind was racing, going over every step, ensuring there were no flaws in his plan. The night before they left, Richard received another message. The Mafia wasn't going to wait much longer. His time was up. His hands trembled as he read the words, a cold wave of fear washing over him. This was it. There was no turning back now. The plan had to work. When the morning of their departure arrived, Elena was filled with excitement. She kissed him, thanking him for planning the trip, calling it exactly what they needed. Richard forced a smile, hiding the weight of what he was about to do. As they boarded their flight, he stared out the window, his mind racing with the final details of his plan. He reassured himself that everything was set. No one would suspect him. It would look like an accident. The insurance payout would come through. His debt would be gone. He would be free. But something in the back of his mind whispered that things were never that simple, that no matter how perfect the plan seemed, fate had a way of unraveling even the most carefully laid schemes. And once the wheels were in motion, there would be no stopping what came next. The sun cast a golden glow over the pristine beaches of Cancun as Richard and Elena arrived at the luxurious resort. Palm trees swayed in the warm breeze, and the rhythmic crash of the waves provided the perfect backdrop for what was supposed to be a romantic getaway. Elena was radiant with excitement, taking in the sights and eagerly planning their activities. To her, this was an escape, a chance to rekindle their relationship and leave behind the stresses of their busy lives. For Richard, it was something far more sinister. He played his part perfectly. Smiling at all the right moments, holding Elena's hand as they strolled through the resort, ordering champagne at dinner. He made sure nothing seemed unusual. Every detail had to be just right. There could be no hesitation, no sign that this trip was anything other than a celebration of their anniversary. The plan was set, and now he just had to wait for the right moment. The first few days passed without incident. They swam in the crystal-clear waters, explored the bustling streets of the city, and indulged in extravagant meals. Elena laughed more than she had in years, unaware that every moment was carefully orchestrated. Richard watched her closely, studying her movements, timing her habits. He needed to be sure of every detail before making his move. The wrong decision could ruin everything. On the third day, he suggested a private boat tour. The idea came naturally, woven into their plans as if it had always been part of the trip. A secluded ride at sunset, just the two of them surrounded by nothing but the vast expanse of the ocean. Elena loved the idea, her eyes lighting up at the thought of an intimate evening on the water. She had no reason to suspect anything. Richard booked the boat through a small local company, ensuring they would be far from the tourist-packed areas. He chose a time when most boats would be returning to shore, leaving them isolated in the open sea. The captain, a friendly man eager to provide a memorable experience, agreed to leave them alone for part of the ride, giving them privacy to enjoy the sunset. Everything was falling into place. When the evening arrived, the sky was painted in hues of orange and pink as the boat cut through the calm waters. Elena leaned against the railing, taking in the breathtaking view, completely unaware of the danger lurking beside her. Richard felt the weight of his decision pressing down on him. His heart pounded in his chest, his hands clammy despite the warm breeze. This was it. The moment he had planned for. Doubt crept in, clouding his thoughts. The memory of their life together flashed through his mind. The years they had spent building a future, the laughter, the love. For a brief second, he wondered if there was another way. But then he remembered the threats, the messages, the cold certainty that if he failed, he would be the one who disappeared next. A single notification lit up his phone, a reminder of what was waiting for him back home. The Mexican Mafia wasn't known for patience, and his time had already run out. The hesitation vanished. He knew what had to be done. Taking a deep breath, he stepped closer. The boat rocked gently beneath them, the water stretching endlessly in every direction. It would only take a moment. A single push. No one would see. No one would know. Elena turned to him, smiling, blissfully unaware of what was coming. Then, in an instant, she was gone. The splash echoed in the quiet night, swallowed by the vastness of the sea. Richard's heart pounded as he stared at the dark water, his breath coming in sharp gasps. For a moment there was nothing but silence. Then, panic. He screamed, called for help, playing the role of the devastated husband. By the time the rescue team arrived, it was too late. The water had claimed her. Everything had gone exactly as planned. But Richard had no idea that the nightmare was just beginning. The authorities arrived at the dock as Richard stood drenched, his clothes soaked from his supposed attempt to save Elena. His face was contorted with grief, his body trembling. Everything had gone exactly as planned. The Mexican police took his statement, asking for details about how Elena had fallen overboard. He recounted the story flawlessly. They had been enjoying the sunset when she lost her balance. He had jumped in after her, but the currents were too strong. He did everything he could, but she was gone before he could reach her. The officers nodded sympathetically, taking notes and asking standard questions. It was clear they had dealt with cases like this before, tragic accidents that happened too often in open waters. With no immediate signs of foul play and no witnesses to contradict his version of events, the investigation appeared routine. Richard knew that as long as he remained calm, it was only a matter of time before they ruled it an unfortunate accident. As the hours dragged on, he maintained his grief-stricken act. Resort staff and fellow tourists murmured their condolences, and the local authorities assured him they would do their best to recover Elena's body, though they warned him that the chances were slim. The ocean had a way of swallowing people whole, especially at night. He nodded, playing the devastated husband, but inside, relief was beginning to settle in. The hardest part was over. He contacted the U.S. Embassy, informing them of the incident. They expressed their condolences and promised to assist with the necessary paperwork. The next step was returning home. He needed to be patient, to wait for everything to process. Once the official reports were filed, he could claim Elena's life insurance and clear his debt. Soon, all of his problems would be behind him. Days passed with no sign of Elena's body. The authorities continued their search, but Richard knew it was a formality. Without a body, the case would close faster. Everything was falling into place. He was already envisioning his future, free from debt, free from fear. The weight that had been suffocating him for months was beginning to lift. Then, something changed. A shift in the air, a subtle crack in his perfect plan. A detective named Javier Morales was assigned to oversee the case. Unlike the others, he wasn't so quick to close the file. Something about the story didn't sit right with him. Accidents like this happened, but something about Richard's demeanor, his rehearsed answers, and the convenient circumstances triggered suspicion. He started digging deeper, requesting surveillance footage from the marina, checking local boat rental records, and interviewing resort staff. Richard began to feel the pressure. He noticed how Morales watched him during questioning, how the detective's eyes lingered a second too long, as if searching for cracks in his story. The questions became more detailed, more precise. Why had he chosen such a secluded boat tour? Why had no one else seen Elena struggling in the water? Why had he waited so long before calling for help? A storm of uncertainty began brewing around him. The insurance company, alerted by the unusual nature of the case, launched its own investigation. They weren't going to release a $5 million payout without looking into every detail. The more people scrutinized the incident, the more restless Richard became. The plan had been flawless, but now it felt like a house of cards, trembling under the weight of suspicion. Then, the worst news came. A fishing vessel, miles from where the incident took place, had discovered something floating in the water. It was a body. A woman? Authorities were working to confirm the identity, but Richard already knew. Elena had returned. And if they found anything that pointed to foul play, his perfect crime would soon become his downfall. Richard sat frozen in the hotel room, staring at his phone. The message from the authorities was brief. Elena's body had been found. He had spent days convincing himself that this moment would never come, that the ocean would keep its secret. But the tide had turned against him. Panic clawed at his throat as he imagined what the autopsy might reveal. Drowning victims carried telltale signs: water in the lungs, the presence of bruising, the condition of their fingernails if they had struggled. He had planned for everything, but he had never expected Elena to come back. If there was any evidence that contradicted his story, everything would unravel. Detective Morales wasted no time. He requested a second interview, this time with a different tone, less sympathetic, more direct. Richard felt the shift immediately. Morales pressed harder, asking for more details, trying to poke holes in his version of events. He repeated the same story word for word, never straying from his original statement. But the detective wasn't buying it. Then the real blow came. The autopsy report arrived, and it revealed something Richard hadn't anticipated. Elena hadn't drowned. Her cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. She had been struck before she entered the water. The moment the words were spoken, Richard felt his world collapse. His carefully crafted plan had a fatal flaw, one he hadn't accounted for. The police wasted no time. What had once been considered an accident was now officially a homicide investigation. Richard was no longer a grieving husband, he was a suspect. Morales ordered a full review of his financial records, travel history, and communication logs. The deeper they dug, the worse it got. The insurance company flagged his claim as suspicious, citing the immediate filing after Elena's disappearance. Bank records showed his financial troubles, the massive debts, and his last-ditch efforts to secure money before the trip. Then came the biggest discovery of all: the Mexican Mafia's connection. Investigators uncovered his dealings with them, the threats he had received, and the massive sum he owed. What once looked like a tragic accident now painted a clear picture of premeditation. Richard's desperation grew by the hour. He called his attorney, trying to get ahead of what was coming. But it was too late. The evidence was piling up, and the authorities were closing in. The final nail in his coffin came when a forensic specialist examined Elena's body more closely. Traces of skin were found under her fingernails, defensive wounds. She had fought back. She hadn't simply fallen. She had struggled, trying to survive. The arrest was swift. The moment Morales had everything he needed, Richard was taken into custody. As the officers placed the cold steel handcuffs around his wrists, reality hit him like a freight train. Everything he had done, everything he had risked, had led him here. There was no escape, no bargaining, no more pretending. The trial was inevitable. Prosecutors painted him as a man driven by greed, someone who saw his wife not as a partner but as a price tag. The jury didn't take long to decide his fate. The evidence was overwhelming: his financial ruin, his ties to the cartel, the suspicious timing of the trip, and the forensic proof that Elena had been assaulted before she went into the water. The verdict was delivered swiftly: guilty of first-degree murder. Richard Alvarez, once a successful businessman, was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. The money he had killed for was never his to claim. The debts remained, but his freedom was gone. The Mexican Mafia never forgot about him. Even behind bars, their reach was long. He had failed them, and failure was never forgiven. His final days would not be lived in regret but in fear, waiting for the moment when they would come to collect the debt he could never repay. If you found this story intriguing, make sure to subscribe to Mystery Minds for more shocking true crime cases. Hit the like button and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest uploads. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.